Hi, this is Teri with Elements Bath & Body. Today I'm going to be showing you how to put recipes into SoapCalc. So let's get started. To find SoapCalc, the address is up here. It's www.soapcalc.net, and you'll come to this screen. Then to calculate a recipe, just go to Recipe Calculator. You see here that each one of these sections has numbers, and you kind of just follow the numbers as you're going through and calculate your recipe. So we'll start with the first one. If you click on these, it gives a little explanation of each number. So for example, this one, it's telling the difference between sodium hydroxide and potassium hydroxide. And for bar soap, you're always going to be using sodium hydroxide, and that's the default up here. So close the window, and this is your default, so you don't need to change anything here. Okay, our next section is weight of oils. When you're putting a recipe in from the internet, you're not going to have the total weight of oils that would go right here. So you're just going to change this to the unit of measurement you're using. And default is pounds, but usually recipes are never in pounds. So you would change this always to either one of these. So we're going to go ounces in this case. Our next section is the water, and the default is set at water as a percentage of oils, and this is set at 38%, and this is very, very high. I would not recommend this unless you are making hot process soap. I normally use around 25 in this area. You can go as low as, I would say, 20. If you're new, you might want to start at about 33% and just work your way down from there. When you discount your water more than 33%, you start to get creamier soap. It doesn't look so grainy. There's less glycerin rivers, and there's less water to evaporate out of it when it's curing, so it's going to cure faster. So you could start with 33 and just work your way down to where you're comfortable, around 25 or so. It depends too on your fragrance. If your fragrance speeds up, then you don't want to get too low. And usually you would soap at room temperature if you're going to be going lower than that. Okay, so we keep this default. This other one is your lye concentration. So if you do 50%, the water would equal the lye. This goes off of your oils. So this number right here would be 38% of this number, or also this number down here, your total oils. And this right here is a ratio. So when I use my 25% up here, my ratio of water to lye is usually around 1.8 to 1. So you'll see that in the next screen. But for beginners, this one is, I would say, the best one to use. This section is your lye discount, or your super fat. And this is the percentage of oils that don't turn to soap and that are left over for moisturizing. You always want a little bit of oils left over for moisturizing. So I've seen as low as 3% here, and that will give you more bubbles, but it also takes away some of the moisture that these higher numbers would give you. So I normally use 6%. I use 6% because I end up super fatting it a little more when I add my colorants. I add oils there. So 6% is a good number for me, but you can use higher. But know that the more oils you have not turning to soap, the less bubbles you're going to have, and the more chance you have of your soap going rancid. In this section, it's the fragrance, and they measure their fragrance ounces per pounds of oils, and that's not normally how you find it on websites. You usually find it per pound of soap, so this number ends up being confusing, and I usually just zero this out, and we can figure out our percentage of oils in the next screen. For this next section, this is where we put in the oils in the recipe. And so for this tutorial, we're going to use a recipe that we have on our website called Taiwan Circling Swirl. And if we look at the recipe, the first oil on there is olive oil. So we double click on the oil, either that or we click it down here and we use the plus button. And the next oil we have is coconut oil, and the coconut oil is always going to be the coconut oil at 76 degrees. So we double click. The next one is palm oil, and the next one is sweet almond oil, which is under almond oil sweet. After that we have cocoa butter, and then castor oil. And for this recipe, we're going to put in ounces. And the olive oil is 10 ounces. Coconut oil is 8.4. And you could hit the tab key to go to the next cell. Palm oil is 7.4. Sweet almond oil is 3.4. Cocoa butter is 3.4. And castor oil is 1. And then we just hit calculate recipe. And once your recipe is calculated, it gives you your percentages, and it also gives you the total weight of your oils down here and up there. So if we want to change it over to percentage, let's say you have a different size of mold, and you know that I used a 10-inch mold, but you have an 8-inch mold. You know the weight of your oils that you normally use in your 8-inch mold. So you would switch this over to percentage. You would put in your oil weight that you normally use, and I normally use 26 ounces for my 8-inch mold. So then I could change that recipe so that I have that very same recipe and I change it to a different size of mold that works for me. Before we go on, I want to let you know that you can change these percentages. You can see that this would have been 30%, so you can change it to 30, and the next one's right. This one would be 22, and then 10, 10, and 3. And you can hit calculate, just make sure that adds up to 100%. We go to the water, and on our site we list what the water as a percentage of oils is, and for this recipe it was 20%, and our super fat was 6%. And we're going to leave this fragrance just 0.0, and we'll figure it out in the next screen. Okay, so we have everything we need, and we'll just hit calculate, and then we'll hit multiple tabs, and that allows us to go to a new screen, and we'll say viewer print recipe. Okay, now that we're in the next screen, this is where we type in the information that we have left, like our title and our additives and also any notes on the recipe. So we are calling this one Taiwan Circling Swirl. And down here, the first additive we put in is sodium lactate. And since that is 1 teaspoon per pound of oils, it's super easy to figure out. This is the pounds of your recipe, so this is always going to be equal to the amount of teaspoons that you use for sodium lactate. So in this one, we'll use 2.1 teaspoon, or just round it to 2. I always put how many teaspoons per pound of oil just for reference when I'm making this recipe again. I don't have to figure it out. Now this would be an easy one to figure out, and I don't usually include sodium lactate since that's just something that's known. But right here you can notate in parentheses what your teaspoons per pounds of oil were. Okay, our next additive that we can figure out is our fragrance. For this recipe we actually did use ounces per pounds of oils. So we use 1 ounce per pound of oil, so that again we'll use this number, 2.1 ounces. And that's green Irish tweed. And you just notate that you used it at 1 ounce and then per pound of oils. Okay, next our additive is chamomile extract. And this one is used at a rate of 1/2 tablespoon per pound of oil, so that's another easy one. You just take this and divide it by 2. So instead of 2 tablespoons, we would just use 1 tablespoon. And now all the additives we have left are the colorants. We use 1/8 teaspoon of yellow oxide, and that is used at a rate of 1/4 teaspoon per pound of oils. And then we have 1/16 teaspoon of brown oxide, and that's used at a rate of 1/8 teaspoon per pound of oils. And then we have titanium dioxide, and we use 2 teaspoons of that, and it's used at a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. And over here you would just put any notes like your temperature and what kind of swirl you're doing and your size of mold, and if you want to force gel, and just notes like that. Okay, and once you have all this information put in, you can just say print recipe. And you can either save it as a PDF file or you can change that and send it to your printer. And that's all. Thank you for joining us and have a great day.